This month's video falls just after the 30th anniversary of the Batman the Animated Series episode, Make 'em Laugh, where the Condiment King made his big debut. That, combined with it also approaching the US holiday of Thanksgiving, felt like the perfect time to cover a double serving of the Mustard Man. In both helpings, we'll be looking at how to make the released Build-A-Figure a little more accurate to his show appearance. Our main course will be more involved swapping parts and doing some sculpting and giving him the works, while the side dish will be covering areas where he could have used some more paint. In that vein, we'll also pop in at the end to slightly repaint McFarlane's second and third Build-A-Figures, Lockup and Maxie Zeus. That'll make this video a rare party of 4, so without further ado, let's get these going, on the fly. We'll start by looking at Buddy's released figure compared to the character's appearance in the show. Right away, when McFarlane released the prototype images, I thought he looked a little too big and muscular for the Monarch of Mayo. In their defense, he did look that big in these 2 shots of his 3-minute scene. The rest of the time, however, he looks like a slender, lanky guy with the slightest bit of a gut. With that in mind, I'm turning to what figure? Say it with me now. Gods and Monsters Batman, that's right. He has appropriately skinny legs and his torso is much slimmer. I'm still going to take it down even further, but he's a much better place to start from compared to the Build-A-Figures frame. I was originally looking at using the Gods and Monsters arms altogether until I compared them to the McFarlane Captain of Ketchup's arms. His shoulders are actually smaller than Batman's, but his forearms are thicker. Since I mentioned that he's supposed to look lanky, I decided to swap them with each other to get the skinniest look from each. That looks better. I went back and forth on his hands a few times, but in the end settled on using the original's hands because they were sculpted so perfectly to hold on to his guns with the trigger fingers and everything. I'm going to keep the original head because they did such a great job on his sculpt. They did miss one thing though. For some reason, they 86'd his ears, so we'll want to add those back on in a bit. His recipe has been hand-picked, so grab your Dremel and fire it up to begin subbing things out. The first things I removed were the white stripe segments on his thighs, then moved up to his belt. Next, I took off his raised collar, followed by his chest lines, and lastly, the pegs on his backpack. Next, I tested the mods we just made to see if the backpack would work now and if the head would fit on the existing Batman ball joint peg. Sand down the areas we just dremeled on the legs and torso and we're ready to put a little epoxy on. Mix and roll up some very small amounts of epoxy and press them into the shallow grooves that are left on his torso. Once that dries, go back and lightly dremel and then sand them over to get them nice and smooth. That's something I've picked up these last couple years. The best way to get something smooth is to use the low setting on the Dremel for a minute before sanding. It really makes a big difference. If you saw when we tested the head on the joint, it was going to be way too tall for Buddy. To fix that, you'll need to cut off the neck and then drill down into the chest cavity so we can lower it. You'll see that I went a little too far and even started dremeling the arm ball joints a bit. Luckily I stopped before it got too severe and they still work as they should. I put some epoxy down in there to raise the neck back up a little and then made sure to clean out the armholes so no epoxy would dry and block the pegs from going back in. Once that's cured, I went back with the Dremel to take his chest in and slim down his sides. The Gods and Monsters Batman was much smaller than McFarlane's torso, but still too muscular for the character. The next things I needed to sculpt were his boot ankle cuffs and then his forearm condiment packets to match the ones on his shoulders. If you want to, you can remove the ones on the original forearms and glue those on instead. I thought it might just be easier to make my own, and I also wanted to use one of the 4 for the loose hot sauce packet he squeezes into someone's throat. Once the ankle cuffs are dry, Dremel them down if needed, and then we can move up and fill in around his neck and then give him his little bit of gut. Reshape any part of the gut that may have come out too big, and then sculpt on some epoxy glove cuffs and belt filler. Once I made his gut, I realized his chest needed to be puffed back out a tiny bit. Again, I had to reshape it after curing, sand it, and then I could sculpt his very recognizable chest emblem. Sculpt his underwear band, and then his thick collar, and then the last layer of his emblem, his C. The final elements to add are the other 2 arm packets and his missing ears. No idea why they skipped out on those. Dremel or sand any of these parts you just sculpted so everything is nice and smooth. Now we're all prepped to squirt paint all over him. This guy may look fairly simple in design, but I ended up using 11 colors on him and 2 additional ones needed for mixing the correct blue. I made 2 attempts at his blue-green bodysuit, but it was tough to decipher what the correct color needed to be based on varying source images. The remastered edition made him a much darker and bluer color, which is what I originally mixed using these 2 colors. That just didn't feel right compared to my memory of him though. If you go back and look at the original broadcast or even the DVDs, he's a much brighter and slightly greener color. Either way, he's still not the green that McFarlane made. These were the paints I ended up using on my second attempt. I figure you can choose from either set based on what you're going for. With the blue decided and started, I turned to painting his canister a light gray where I removed the pegs, his straps a darker gray, and then his gauges needed to go black to match the source material. Grab a white for his gloves, boots, and undies, and a turquoise for his underwear band. Then repaint his pale skin, his eyebrows back in if needed, and grab this green for a perfect match to their green to cover his new ears. The only things left are his chest emblem colors and then a really neat transparent effect on his guns. Assemble him back together and order up! Oh man, chef's kiss! I really like this new one so much more than the original release. Speaking of... I said it in the opening, but we're pulling a double shift with this guy, and now I'm going to show you how you can make a few upgrades to the existing Build-A-Figure to make him a little more accurate. McFarlane likes to save money where they can, and the first thing to make a no-call no-show were some extra paint apps. The Prince of Pickles got a little stiffed on paint, so we can add some of that back in to liven him up. Let's check in with Expo and see what was missed. I think the biggest omission here is leaving his harness straps white. That's a simple few coats of gray and he already looks more cohesive. A couple other touches you can add are painting black on his canister gauges and then the turquoise band at the top of his underwear. Another contender for the biggest paint omission is leaving his arm packets a stark white, so those need to be painted red and a light yellow on the right and left arms respectively. Ever since the McFarlane re-released BTAS figures have been coming out, one major point of contention with some fans is the cell shading they've chosen. If you want to remove that, simply take some acrylic brush cleaner, dip a Q-tip in it, and lightly swipe away what you want to remove. You may have to go over it a few times and then wipe any excess away. Careful to not let it sit on there too long though. One major thing that will help the figure overall has to do with correcting his loose hips. It's actually a pretty simple thing and it makes a massive difference in his ability to stay standing for more than a few seconds. Pop the legs off at the hips and place some super glue on the ball joint itself. Put the leg back on and move it around a little bit. Let him sit for a minute and then move his leg again. Repeat that for a few minutes and then do the same with the other leg. He'll stand so much better afterwards and you may find yourself doing it to other figures. Looking at you, Mr. Freeze from the same wave. One more addition that I think is a must-have after doing it on my rebuild is to paint the guns with a lighter color on top to simulate the condiments inside kind of sloshing around. It really makes them pop and looks great in person. The key is to choose just the right shade, and these are the 2 colors I went with. To put the final garnish on him, we can add little black dots to both the ends of his guns as well as the inside of the gun caps. While not as gourmet as the first, he's certainly more palatable than the original release now. With the bulk of our meal done, we turn to some complimentary dessert, sprucing up McFarlane's other 2 Build-A-Figures, Lockup and Maxie Zeus. Lockup is an extremely well done offering from McFarlane, and only 2 things stood out to me. First, his cell shading doesn't seem like the natural darker shade of the blue he's wearing. It's a simple fix. All you need to do is grab a navy like this one, and then put 3 or 4 coats on for good coverage. Secondly, his chains could use a few simple cutouts to give it that extra little bit of contrast. Grab an X-Acto knife and push in and around until you're happy with the results. Small changes, but I think he looks a little better now. At the time of publishing, Wave 3 of the BTAS figures just hit in the last month and Maxie Zeus came with it. Again, another outstanding figure. His skin color is appropriately matte like the old DCC figures, so that's a very welcome change. The only thing I want to revise is that color of blue they chose for his tunic. Compared to the show, it's much lighter, so again, 3 or 4 coats of a powdery type of blue will get you there. It's worth noting they also shorted Maxie some white paint underneath his toga, but we don't know for sure if that's how he wore it. If they hadn't have missed the white paint, I wouldn't have come up with this funny image though. As a bonus for him, I also want to make his little horn cup he drinks out of because it's so fitting for his cosplay. Just roll up some epoxy, squish the top down while you roll it between your fingers, and let it dry. Dremel it if you need to, spray it white, paint the yellow and blue details, and now he has a nice second accessory for photo shoots. Regarding the accessory they did give him, I'm not sure why they made it curved. It's even straight on the artwork on the back of all the boxes. Without making an entirely new one, do you have any ideas how we could straighten it out? Comment below if you do. I've relished our time together today, but that brings this video to a close. Drop a like if you enjoyed it and subscribe for more monthly content like this and occasional shorts featuring tips or additional customs. Follow me on Instagram if you want to see more customs like these and all my latest work. For the next one, it's the winner of the fan vote from a couple months ago. You all chose to see how Terry McGinnis and 10 from the Royal Flush Gang were made, so I'll be closing out the Year of Batman Beyond's 25th anniversary in style. Check out the rest of my catalog of videos while you wait for that next one. Have a good one, and happy customizing!